Another key aspect of Photoshop is, of course, color and being able to understand color and to where to find your colors and just using your swatches and paintbrushes as well. So one thing you should really kind of get to understand or get to know is how you can kind of use colors in Photoshop um, for how you can organize them, how you can implement them quite easily, how you can save them quite easily in terms of working with a specific palette. And one of the key ways you can do this is with swatches. And your swatches panel is what you'll find in your top right panel. You might not find it there, so if you just scroll to your window and then scroll down to swatches and click, it will automatically select. You can automatically get those swatches in as a panel, and it will just make it easier to see your swatches. You might see in your swatches panel that you already have a kind of preset categories of basically ones that Photoshop have automatically come up with. And as you can see, there's basically just a list of different colors. And if you click on them, you can basically select these colors and basically quite easily access them in your workspace. So in your workspace, you have at the bottom of your left toolbar, there's basically two colors, your foreground and your background color. Foreground is the color that's above, background is behind it. You can set these differently so that when you're either filling something that you've selected or using a paintbrush, it will select this foreground color as the color that it sets on the paintbrush. But you can toggle quite easily between two colors if you press the X key based on your foreground and background. The default of these is just black and white, but if you click on any of these colors and then hover over anywhere on your image or on a swatch, then you can select with this eyedropper tool and select a different color for your foreground color, like so. So if I wanted to, for example, add a swatch or add a swatch to any library or create my own category. For example, if I wanted to kind of document the colors that I was, really liking in this original composition of the boats, I could just use my eyedropper tool and select this color that I quite like of the bench on the boat, and I've got it. You can see that I've got it selected as my foreground color here. So if I scroll to my swatches menu and click on this plus icon here, it will say I can add a swatch. So I can name this swatch anything. I'll just call it boat bench, and it will automatically add it to whatever category I'm currently got selected. But if I wanted to create a new folder or new group, I can just create a new group and just call this boat project. And then I've got this folder that I can create and then add my swatches to. So if I wanted to add another swatch, maybe for the kind of the buoy floaty thing on the side of the boat, I can do that as well. I'll select it with the eyedropper, add a swatch, and then I'll add a swatch there. And then for this kind of red rope, I'll add it again. And as you can see, I've got kind of a nice set of colors on my swatches list. So one of the key things that you will use color for is for if you're doing any painting or brush work. You can select the brush tool here on the left. You'll see it just looks like a simple paintbrush. A faster way you can select it is by pressing the B, the B key, and you'll find that you have this circular icon, which is showing you your kind of basic brush. You can increase the size of the brush if you click on this top bit with the top menu, and there's a chevron next to should be just a circle with a number, and you can change the size of this. It will give you the size in pixels using this slider here. But a faster way to do this would be to use the brackets. So you can use the right bracket and left brackets on your keyboard, and those will quickly change the size of your paintbrush. Alternatively, you could also right click on your screen, and it will give you a kind of the menu that you've seen in the top there, and you can quickly change your slider from there as well. So using the brush is pretty simple in terms of just once you've got it selected and you hold it down, it will brush. It will just kind of paint onto the image. If you're holding down as you brush, it will just fill in. If you can brush a straight line. If you hold Shift, it will automatically just lock your whatever you're painting into a straight line. If you draw a point there, and then if you hold Shift and then click again, it will draw a straight brush line between those 2 points and connect them. There's a few different ways that you can kind of affect how the brushstroke is kind of interacting, how they're kind of layering on top of each other. You can change the hardness, which will basically change how blurry the outsides of the brush are. So it will make it softer essentially if you have a low hardness. As you can see here, it kind of has made, instead of a hard outline, quite graphical, defined edge, it's kind of become a bit blurry, kind of soft around the edges, which can be a good effect if you're looking for something a bit more subtle in terms of the brush. You'll notice as well that you can change the opacity of the brush in the top. So if I were to decrease the opacity, at the moment it's 100%. If it was a 50% opacity, then you'd see that some of the brush is transparent, so it will kind of add this this tone on top of the image, but I'll still be able to see some below it. One thing to note with the opacity of the brush below 100% is that if I were to brush over the same area, it will continuously accumulate kind of the opacity and just make basically a less transparent, more opaque region as I'm adding more brush strokes, kind of to simulate what would happen if you were to kind of add loads of maybe slightly transparent brush strokes. It will accumulate over time. If some of the other tools that you can find with brush strokes is the flow tool. So this will basically change how much of your basically, if it was a spray paint can that you're kind of using as your kind of nozzle as you're painting over, the flow will change how much of it is coming out kind of the nozzle at what pace. So kind of a high flow, you won't see much difference. It will just kind of all come out at the same time. But if it was a low flow, say like 1%, you'll see that it kind of takes a long time for the paint to kind of build up. So this can again be good if you want maybe more of a subtle, kind of maybe more shadowy type effect going on, because it takes a long time for any kind of, or at least a longer time for the kind of the paint to add, or the paintbrush to really add up. Another thing, if you're kind of looking for more of a smooth and maybe more graphic kind of way of painting, is the smoothing tool you can use. Is basically lets you have less jittery lines when you're painting. It can be quite hard with a mouse to kind of create a smooth line. So the smoothing, if you increase the smoothing here, it really does help with kind of achieving a smoother, cleaner line when you're painting. So you'll see that when I'm kind of, as I'm painting with 100% smoothness, it's kind of making a much smoother line, even though my movements might not be as smooth as this in reality. And you can see this if I have no smoothness, my smoothing is 0. It becomes a lot harder to make a continuous line. It kind of becomes quite jittery and kind of has to catch up a bit as well. So you'll find that using the smoothing tool can be smoothing slider can be very helpful in terms of creating a much nicer looking brush stroke. Again, in terms of the brush strokes, similar to how you can use blend modes with your layers, you can also use them with brush strokes. This will be more obvious if you're using different colors with your brush strokes. So if you're maybe just trying to do like a painting on Photoshop, straight away. If I'm using a number of different colors, you see that now currently my blend mode is normal, but if I were to use say a lighten blend mode, you'll see that the way that the brush strokes are interacting becomes very different. So you can kind of toggle between these and see how changing the blend mode drastically changes the way that the brush strokes are kind of interacting with each other as you accumulate them on top of each other. The last thing that I really wanted to cover with brushes and colors is how you can use, you can fill, if you just want to fill something with a color instead of basically having, the last thing that I really wanted to cover was how you can use the paint buckets and just to fill a selected area instead of having to brush something out. So again, you can achieve this just by using your basic selection tool. So you can select or lasso any area you want. So maybe just a spoke area. And once I have this selected, if I use my paint bucket tool, if I find my paint bucket tool, which is in this left toolbar, you might see it. It should be in G, the G hotkey. So if you can't find it there, it might be already the gradient tool. And if I select the paint bucket tool, it'll give me this paint bucket basically. And if I click on an area in a new layer, it will fill that layer with a certain color. One thing that you will find as well nested with the paint bucket tool is the gradient tool. So this gradient basically lets you create a gradient. So instead of it just being one color, it will kind of have one color fading into another color. And I can, once I have this gradient tool selected, I can find a number of different options as to different kind of types of gradients or different colors already, or I can create my own. Well, let's say I wanted something like this, kind of moving from a light to blue, kind of a greeny to bluey color. All I have to do is have this selected, use my gradient fill, draw out a line which will kind of be the line of my gradient, and I have it filled, and it's kind of naturally filling in this area with this gradient, like so. Another thing to cover quickly is using the mixer brush tool. So I showed you kind of using the brush and just drawing kind of separate lines, but for the most part, you'll notice that as you're adding brushes and different brush strokes, they aren't really mixing together. They're kind of just going on one on top of the other, and they're not really kind of they don't really have that kind of same physics of you know, a real brush stroke. If you're painting like maybe using kind of heavy oils or acrylics, and you know, they might kind of blend into each other a bit more. And you can actually achieve that kind of effect with Photoshop brushes. You just need to use the mixer brush tool, which you'll find on the left toolbar, again with the B hotkey. At the bottom, it's kind of this paintbrush with a kind of a drop of paint hanging over it. And if I select my mixer brush tool and I have it selected, I'll just do a normal brush stroke size type. You'll notice there's a number of different standard options at the top, a bit more than when you just have the normal brush. And this is just, these options are basically just to do with whether you're kind of mixing with a clean brush or you're mixing with already a different color selected. I tend to like to try and use the clean brush just because it means that I'm not really overcomplicating how I'm mixing stuff together. So if I have these current settings now and I just kind of use my mixer brush and draw a straight line here, you'll see that as I draw paint my line, the colors are kind of blending into each other and they're kind of smoothing into the same color and actually properly mixing with each other. So if I go in the opposite direction, you'll see it kind of mixes in the opposite way. And these sliders here basically change the amount of kind of the wetness, will change how much the brush you know, can mix. So if it's a lower wetness, you'll find that it kind of doesn't have as much capability to hold as much paint. Like high wetness will just mean it can hold more paint. Load as well does the same thing as well. And mix, again, will just change how much they are mixing. The colors will kind of mix together as well. So you can kind of experiment with these, but this tool is very helpful if you want a kind of more realistic way of painting in Photoshop. I think that about covers it in terms of the basic Photoshop tools to get you started on using Photoshop for photo editing, art, and all these different purposes. But this is kind of there is, of course, a number of different ways of doing these commands, and it can get much more specific in terms of what you can do with Photoshop and the different tools at your disposal. But I hope this has kind of helped in terms of introducing you to what it is capable of and how to get around the basic capabilities.